The Galactic Empire's underestimation of humanity. The Emperor of the Galactic Sovereignty reclined on his throne of shimmering orichalcum, gazing down at the assembled council. Before him, an array of alien advisors shifted uneasily, their biomechanical limbs clicking against the polished obsidian floor. At the center of the gathering, Grand Strategist Youthran spoke, his voice resonating with a rhythmic hum. Your Eminence, the intelligence reports suggest that the Terrans have mobilized a fleet in defiance of the Sovereignty's decree. While they are a resourceful species, their technology is centuries behind our own. The probability of their success is negligible. The Emperor's lips curled into a smirk, a predictable response from primitives. Perhaps a demonstration of our superiority will remind them of their place. On the fringes of the galaxy, in a hidden facility beneath the surface of Titan's largest moon, humanity's leaders huddled around a holographic table. General Alexis Cade, her sharp features illuminated by the blue light of the tactical display, gestured at the projection of the Empire's invasion route. This is their Achilles heel, she said, her voice calm but firm. The Sovereignty relies on centralized command and control. If we can sever their communication relay here, she tapped the hologram, highlighting a sector marked Epsilon Trine, we force their fleets into disarray. Captain Idris Vance, a decorated pilot with a reputation for recklessness, leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes glinting with challenge. You're talking about hitting them right in the heart of their operation. That's a suicide mission. Cade locked eyes with him. It's the only way we buy Earth enough time to evacuate its population. Vance exhaled sharply, but nodded. Then I guess we'd better make it count. As preparations for the mission began, deep in the Sovereignty's capital, a shadow moved within the Emperor's court. High Chancellor Lyrian, a secret sympathizer of humanity, watched the unfolding drama with growing unease. Lyrian's people, the Erythians, had been one of the first races subjugated by the Sovereignty. The Chancellor's alliance with the humans was born not of sentimentality, but of a calculated desire to see the Empire fractured. In her private chambers, Lyrian activated a concealed transponder. A holographic image of Alexis Cade flickered into existence. We don't have much time, Lyrian said, her voice low but urgent. I've managed to leak the fleet's security codes to your team. Use them wisely. Cade nodded. We're grateful, but this won't absolve you if we fail. Lyrian's lips tightened. I have no illusions. Victory for your kind means chaos for mine. But chaos is better than annihilation. In the depths of space, aboard the Argonaut, Idris Vance reviewed the stolen codes with his crew. The sleek frigate, armed to the teeth but hopelessly outclassed against the Empire's behemoth warships, was humanity's spearhead in the coming strike. We're threading a needle here, Vance said to his co-pilot, a grizzled engineer named Mika Rowe. One misstep, and we're cosmic dust. Rowe grinned, her cybernetic arm adjusting a panel on the control board. Ain't no glory without a little risk, Captain. The Argonaut emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Epsilon Trine, a star system teeming with Sovereignty vessels. The stolen codes worked temporarily. Vance piloted the ship through the perimeter, evading detection. But as they approached the relay station, an alarm blared. Proximity sensors tripped. Rowe barked. They're onto us. Vance cursed under his breath, yanking the controls to weave through incoming fire. All units, prepare for engagement. As the Argonaut launched its payload of decoy drones, humanity's secret weapon came into play. A fleet of cloaked fighters, built using reverse-engineered Sovereignty tech, decloaked and unleashed a coordinated barrage against the station's defenses. Meanwhile, on the station's surface, Alexis Cade and her strike team infiltrated the facility. The stolen codes granted them access to the inner sanctum, but the Sovereignty's guards were relentless. Cade's squad advanced methodically, their experimental railguns cutting through enemy lines with brutal efficiency. Set the charges and fall back, Cade ordered as they reached the central communications core. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Reyes, hesitated. Ma'am, if we detonate here, the blast radius might not leave us enough time to do it, Cade snapped. This isn't about us. The charges were armed. Cade and her team retreated under heavy fire. each step feeling like a lifetime. As they reached the extraction point, the Argonauts swooped in, its energy shields barely holding against the onslaught. "Get us out of here!" Cade shouted as she and her team boarded the frigate. Vance didn't need to be told twice. The Argonaut punched through the Sovereignty's blockade, its engines screaming under the strain. Behind them, the relay station erupted in a brilliant cascade of fire and debris, severing the Empire's command network across the sector. In the Sovereignty's throne room, the Emperor rose from his seat, his composure cracking for the first time in decades. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Reports indicate the Terrans have struck Epsilon Trine," Youthran said, his usual confidence faltering. "Our fleets are in disarray. It will take weeks to re-establish communications." The Emperor's gaze hardened. "So, the insects have teeth. Very well. They will learn the cost of defiance." On board the Argonaut, the crew celebrated their victory, but the mood was tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. "This is just the beginning," Cade said to Vance, her voice resolute. "They'll come at us with everything they've got." Vance smirked, his usual bravado intact. "Let them. They've already underestimated us once. That was their first mistake, humanity's first major victory." The sun bled crimson over the jagged horizon as the last of Earth's defensive satellites burned up in the atmosphere, leaving only smoke trails as their epitaph. Captain Amara Voss stood on the shattered bridge of the Aegis Valor, her breath fogging in the thin air, her fingers tightening around the railing. The flagship of humanity's once proud space fleet was little more than a hollowed-out husk, its hull peppered with glowing rents from alien weaponry. Around her, the bridge crew worked in strained silence, their faces pale with exhaustion, their movements taut with fear. The enemy had not relented for 3 days. "They'll breach orbit in 40 minutes, Lieutenant Carson Beck reported, his voice cracking despite his best efforts to sound composed. He pointed to the tactical display where the alien fleet, a writhing mass of organic vessels, surged closer. "We've lost most of our ground-to-space cannons. Earth's surface defenses won't hold for long." Amara's jaw tightened. The enemy, a biomechanical species humanity had dubbed the Clerians, had appeared without warning 6 months ago, carving through the outer colonies like a scythe through dry wheat. This was their final push. Earth was their prize, the heart of humanity's resistance. And they were winning. "Have we heard from Commander Riyadh?" Amara asked. Her voice carried a measured calm, but inside, her thoughts churned like storm-tossed seas. Riyadh was leading the ground forces in a desperate bid to retake Luna Base, the only facility left with the capability to recharge humanity's last planetary defense weapon, the Helios Array. "Negative," Beck replied, avoiding her gaze. "Their comms are down." "Of course they are." Amara ran a hand over her sweat-streaked face, her mind spinning through possibilities. She could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers pressing against her like a leaden shroud. The survival of their species depended on her making the right call. At that moment, a faint, rhythmic hum vibrated through the ship. The few operational consoles flickered. Amara's heart leaped as the face of her chief engineer, Lieutenant Rei Nakamura, filled the main screen. Her gray coveralls were scorched, her short hair matted with soot. "I've stabilized the reactor core," Rei announced, her voice tinged with weariness and triumph. "We got enough power for one final shot with the forward cannons." Amara's mind clicked into place. The Aegis Valor was a skeleton of its former self, but even a wounded beast could still strike. "What kind of damage could we do?" she asked. "If we overcharge the particle lance," Rei said, "we could cripple their flagship. Might give the ground teams time to finish the Helios recharge." "Might," Beck muttered, his eyes darting between the captain and the tactical display. Amara turned her gaze to the screen. The Clerian flagship loomed at the center of the enemy formation, its undulating surface radiating an eerie, bioluminescent glow. It was their command nexus, the brain coordinating their swarm. Destroy it, and the tide could turn. Fail, and Earth's last hope would die with them. "We'll make it work," Amara said firmly. "Beck, plot a firing solution." "Nakamura, push that reactor for everything it's got. We'll need every joule of energy." "Yes, Captain," they said in unison. Amara straightened, her spine stiffening under the invisible weight of command. "All hands," she broadcast, her voice steady. "Prepare for one last strike. This is not just for Earth. This is for everything we've lost, and for everything we refuse to surrender." The crew's grim resolve solidified in the silence that followed. They had no illusions of survival. This was not a battle to be won. It was a sacrifice to buy humanity another day. Far below, on the scarred surface of Luna, Commander Idris Riyad ducked behind the twisted remains of a supply truck as a Clearian drone spat corrosive acid in his direction. The ground hissed and bubbled where the fluid struck, the air filling with a chemical stench that burned his lungs. His team of Marines, reduced to half their original strength, returned fire with Gauss rifles that hummed with barely contained energy. The alien creature shrieked as it crumpled, its body oozing bioluminescent ichor. "We're pinned," Private Eliza Trent shouted, her face streaked with blood and moon dust. "There's no way we're getting to the Helios core." "We have to," Idris growled, his teeth clenched. His hand brushed against the shard of his daughter's photograph tucked into his armor, his talisman, his reason for fighting. "If that array doesn't fire, Earth is done." A sharp crack of static burst over his comm, followed by a voice crackling with urgency. "Riyad, this is Captain Voss. We're taking our shot at the flagship. You need to hold those drones off long enough for the Helios to recharge." Idris bit back a bitter laugh. "Hold them off? We got maybe 10 men still breathing." "Then make it count, Commander," Amara replied. The line went dead. Idris took a deep breath, his mind racing. "Trent, Williams, take the high ground and lay down suppressive fire. The rest of you with me. We're pushing forward." The Marines hesitated for only a moment before obeying. The Clearian drones swarmed, their grotesque forms glinting under the harsh lunar light. But the Marines fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their weapons flaring like dying stars. On the Aegis Valor, the particle lance hummed with barely contained power. Amara watched as the targeting reticule locked onto the Clearian flagship. Sweat dripped down her back, but she held her ground, her expression resolute. "Ready to fire on your mark, Captain," Beck said, his fingers hovering over the control panel. Amara hesitated for the briefest of moments, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Then she gave the order, "Fire!" The ship shuddered as the particle lance discharged, a brilliant beam of energy slicing through the void. Time seemed to slow as it struck the Clearian flagship, ripping through its organic hull in a blinding explosion of light and debris. On the surface, Idris and his team paused as the shockwave rippled through the enemy ranks. The drones faltered, their movements erratic as if disoriented. Idris seized the opportunity, rallying his team for a final charge toward the Helios core. "Push forward," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "This is it." With a final burst of effort, the Marines reached the core. Idris slammed the activation panel, his heart pounding as the massive weapon roared to life. A column of pure energy shot upward, piercing the heavens and engulfing the Clearian fleet in a cascade of fire. On the bridge of the Aegis Valor, Amara sagged against the railing as cheers erupted around her. The Clearian fleet was breaking apart, their cohesion shattered. For the first time in 6 months, humanity had dealt the invaders a decisive blow. But Amara's eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, where the remains of the Aegis Valor drifted in orbit, surrounded by debris. Victory had come at a cost she wasn't sure humanity could continue to pay. "Send the signal to Earth," she said quietly. "We've won. For now." As the bridge fell silent, Amara allowed herself a moment to breathe. They had bought humanity a reprieve, but she knew the war was far from over. The turning point. Smoke coiled in the air, weaving between the jagged ruins of what had once been a bustling city square. Captain Lyra Cashin tightened her grip on the hilt of her saber. "It's orders, Captain," came the low voice of Sergeant Dren. His scarred face betrayed neither fear nor hope, only the stoic resolve that had carried them through countless skirmishes. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the horizon, where the banners of the Dominion forces fluttered arrogantly. Beyond those gates lay the fulcrum of the war, the Dominion's command nexus. To destroy, it would cripple their ability to coordinate, giving the fractured coalition forces their first real chance at victory. But the cost of failure would be unthinkable. "We infiltrate at first light," Lyra said finally, her voice steady despite the storm of doubt within her. "No margin for error. Dren, take point with Kyrie's. Davar, you're on overwatch. If we're spotted before we reach the central chamber," she let the sentence trail off. The implications didn't need to be spoken aloud. Behind her, a younger soldier shifted nervously. Kyrie's was barely more than a boy, his freckled face too soft for war. Yet his sharp eyes and steady hands had proven invaluable with a sniper rifle. "Captain," he ventured, "do you think they'll know we're coming?" "They always know," Dren muttered darkly. Lyra shot him a warning glance. "They'll expect resistance, but they won't expect us to strike so soon. We move fast, keep quiet, and stay together. That's how we win." A flicker of doubt crossed Kyrie's face, but he nodded, clutching his rifle like a lifeline. As the squad retreated to their makeshift shelter for a final briefing, Lyra allowed herself a moment of solitude. She climbed a crumbling staircase to what remained of an upper floor, her boots crunching softly on shattered glass. The stars above were unervingly clear, a sharp contrast to the carnage below. She traced the edge of her saber, its blade etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dark. A relic from a time before the war, before the world had been split into factions fighting for survival. "Lyra!" The voice startled her, but she didn't turn. She recognized it instantly. Commander Aaron Voss, the Coalition's enigmatic leader, who had arrived hours earlier with new intelligence on the Dominion's movements. "You should rest," Lyra said without looking at him. "Tomorrow will be unforgiving. So will tonight, if we fail to prepare," Voss countered, stepping into her peripheral vision. His presence was magnetic, his pale gray eyes holding the weight of too many sacrifices. "Do you trust your team?" "They're capable," Lyra replied, avoiding the question's deeper meaning. "That wasn't what I asked." She finally met his gaze. "I trust them to do their best. Whether that's enough remains to be seen." Voss studied her, his expression inscrutable. "You'll lead them well," he said after a pause. "But remember, this mission isn't just about tactics. It's about conviction. If you falter, they will too." "I won't falter," Lyra said firmly, though the words felt heavier than she intended. Voss gave a curt nod and turned to leave, his dark cloak sweeping behind him. "See that you don't." The assault began just before dawn, the horizon painted with hues of crimson and gold. Lyra's squad moved like shadows through the rubble, their breath shallow and steps deliberate. Every creak of metal, every distant echo felt magnified, a potential harbinger of discovery. They reached the outer perimeter without incident, crouching in the cover of a fallen pillar as Dren disabled the first set of security drones. The faint hum of their circuits died abruptly, leaving only the sound of the wind. "Clear," Dren whispered, motioning for the others to follow. The team advanced, weaving through the maze of debris until they reached the secondary gate. This one was heavily reinforced, its surface marked with the Dominion's emblem, a serpent coiled around a sword. Davar took position on a nearby vantage point, his rifle trained on the patrol route above. "Two guards," he murmured through the comms. "Standard formation." Lyra signaled to Kyrie's, who nodded and raised his rifle. Two silenced shots echoed faintly, and the guards crumpled silently to the ground. "Move," Lyra ordered, her voice sharp but controlled. They breached the gate with a controlled detonation, the muffled explosion barely audible against the rising wind. Beyond it lay the heart of the stronghold, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each one potentially teeming with Dominion soldiers. "Eyes open," Lyra reminded them as they pressed forward. "We don't stop until we reach the command chamber." The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in, their smooth, metallic surfaces reflecting faint traces of the squad's movements. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential threat. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The massive doors loomed ahead, their edges glowing with a faint blue light. Lyra gestured for the others to take position. Dren, plant the charges, she instructed. Kiri's cover him. As Dren worked quickly and methodically, Lyra's gaze swept the corridor behind them. Something fell off, a prickle at the base of her neck, as though unseen eyes were watching. She tightened her grip on her saber. Charges set, Dren reported. Ready on your mark. Lyra took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment, the point of no return. She raised her hand to give the signal. But before she could lower it, the air was shattered by the blaring of an alarm. Red lights flooded the corridor, and a deep, mechanical voice echoed through the stronghold. Intruders detected. All units, engage. Ambush! Davar shouted from his perch, firing a shot that dropped the first wave of advancing soldiers. Kiri's, cover the rear! Dren, blow the charges! Lyra commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. The explosion rocked the stronghold, the blast wave knocking several Dominion soldiers off their feet. The doors to the command chamber were blown inward, revealing a sprawling room dominated by a holographic map of the battlefield. Inside now, Lyra ordered, leading the charge. Amid the chaos, Lyra spotted their target, a control terminal at the center of the room. If they could upload the virus Voss had provided, it would dismantle the Dominion's network and leave their forces blind. Kiri's, cover me! Lyra shouted as she sprinted toward the terminal. 10 seconds, she called out, her voice strained. The squad held their ground, but the Dominion reinforcements were relentless. Dren was hit, a glancing wound to his shoulder that left him cursing, but still standing. Kiri's rifle clicked empty, and he drew his sidearm, his shots growing more frantic. Upload complete, Lyra announced, yanking the drive free. Fall back. As the squad retreated, the stronghold began to tremble. The virus had done its work, triggering a chain reaction within the Dominion systems. Explosions erupted throughout the corridors, the walls buckling under the strain. They barely made it outside before the entire structure collapsed, a thunderous roar shaking the ground beneath them. Breathing heavily, Lyra turned to her team. They were battered and bloodied, but alive. It's done, she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. The tide has turned, but in her heart, she knew the war was far from over.